For years ago, I made a mistake I couldn't take back. One night with the CEO of the company I worked for, and everything changed. I found out I was pregnant. But it wasn't just him who found out. His mother, powerful, unforgiving, forced me to leave Seoul without a word. I walked away from everything, my career, my pride, my chance at a future with him. Or so I thought. Now, I'm back in Seoul, a new life, a daughter, trying to forget the past. But fate has a funny way of bringing people together. I just ran into him, at a cafe. And this time, there's no turning back. Before we continue, don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. This will make me so happy. Lena had never been one for office parties. They were loud, chaotic, and full of people she barely knew. But tonight, something felt different. She didn't know if it was the festive decorations, the endless supply of champagne, or the way the year had unfolded, draining her more than usual, but she had finally decided to relax. The company she worked for had grown exponentially over the last few years, and now, in the grand ballroom of a sleek hotel in the heart of Seoul, the team was celebrating. There were faces everywhere, familiar, yet distant. Her colleagues, some of whom she barely exchanged pleasantries with, laughed and danced in circles. And then there was him. Hyun-seok. The CEO of Veritech, a man who seemed to have it all, wealth, power, and a reputation that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who worked under him. He was a man whose gaze could silence an entire boardroom, whose decisions could make or break careers, whose mere presence turned heads in every room he entered. And yet, there he was, standing by the edge of the room, looking as out of place as she felt. Lena had always admired him from a distance, never imagining her path would cross his in such an intimate way. She wasn't naive. She knew better than to dream about a man like him. She wasn't his type, she was just a secretary, another cog in the machine of his tech empire. He'd never see her as anything more. But tonight was different. Lena took a sip of champagne, feeling the bubbles tickle her throat as she stood near the bar, quietly observing. She knew she had no reason to be nervous. After all, she was just a guest at the party. But something inside her began to shift as her gaze locked with Hyun-seok's. His eyes, dark and piercing, held hers for a beat longer than she expected, and in that instant, she felt a flutter in her chest that made her suddenly aware of the way her heart beat a little faster. He walked over to the bar, his steps confident, his presence commanding. Lena quickly looked away, trying to calm the rush of warmth flooding her cheeks. Lena, his voice was calm, smooth, like the deep undertones of a well-rehearsed speech. He was standing right next to her now, close enough for her to smell the expensive cologne that clung to his sharp suit. "I didn't expect to see you here." Lena swallowed, unsure how to respond. I didn't think I'd be here either, she said, surprising herself with the honesty in her voice. "But it's a nice change." Hyun-seok smiled, his lips curling up just slightly, enough to make her heart skip. Nice change, indeed. He looked at her for a moment before speaking again. "I'd love to talk more. Away from the noise, maybe?" Before Lena could reply, a voice called from the other side of the room, pulling him away. It was his assistant, no doubt reminding him of his next obligation. Hyun-seok nodded in acknowledgement, but before he walked off, he turned back to her. "I'll be back," he said, with a promise that felt more like a dare. Lena watched him go, a whirlwind of emotions stirring inside her. Had that really just happened? Had he really just singled her out in a room full of people? Later that night, after hours of mingling and awkward small talk, Lena found herself in the quiet of the office, the party winding down around her. She had retreated to the quiet space for a moment of reprieve, but there, standing in the doorway, was Hyun-seok again. "Lena," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You look like you could use some company." The air was thick with an unspoken tension. She could feel it, even before he stepped closer. His presence felt like an electric charge, humming between them, pulling them together with an invisible force. The office, once a professional environment, now felt like an entirely different world, one where the rules were suddenly blurred. She had no idea how it happened, but one thing led to a. Before she could even think twice, his lips were on hers, slow, deliberate, and strangely tender. Her mind screamed to stop, to pull away, but her body refused to listen. She was swept up in the moment, in the warmth of his touch, in the fire that ignited inside her. It didn't matter that she'd had too much to drink. It didn't matter that this was a terrible idea. She wasn't thinking about any of that. She only knew that, for the first time in a long time, she felt alive. The morning after was a blur of confusion and regret. Lena woke up with the light streaming through the window, her head pounding and her body aching. She had no idea how she had ended up in his penthouse, in the bed they now shared. She glanced around, disoriented, her breath catching in her throat as she realized where she was. And then it hit her, what had happened. Hyun-seok, still asleep next to her, looked peaceful, untouched by the storm of emotions now churning inside her. Lena sat up, her mind racing as she tried to piece together the night. She needed to leave. She needed to forget this. But it was too late. Her world had just changed forever. As she stood to gather her things, she felt a shift in her body, an unmistakable sign that things weren't as simple as just walking away. She was pregnant. Lena stood frozen for a moment. The weight of it all sank in, the momentary joy now tainted with a mix of fear and uncertainty. What would she do now? She wasn't prepared for this. She had made a mistake, and the consequences were more than she could handle. And Hyun-seok? He had no idea what he had done. Lena had never been one to shy away from responsibility. It was part of who she was, a hard worker, a go-getter, someone who'd never let herself be swayed by emotions or impulsive decisions. But that was before this. She sat on the edge of the bed in Hyun-seok's penthouse, her fingers wrapped tightly around the plush comforter, as if it could shield her from the overwhelming storm inside her. The sunlight filtered through the large windows, casting a warm golden glow over the sleek, modern furniture, but it did nothing to ease the cold knot of panic that had settled in her chest. She had slept with the CEO of the company she worked for. And now, she was pregnant. The thought struck her like a hammer, her breath catching in her throat. She ran a hand over her face, trying to steady herself. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, faster than she could process it. What had I done? Hyun-seok's breathing was calm beside her, his form still and relaxed in deep sleep. He looked so different now. In the heat of the moment, he'd been someone she couldn't resist, someone who had seemed more human than the untouchable CEO he was. But now, with the harsh light of reality, she was starting to see him for what he really was, a man who lived in a world where power and control were everything. Lena knew that she didn't belong in that world. And she couldn't afford to stay there. She stood up, trying not to make a sound as she quietly gathered her things. The room seemed so alien to her now. She had never imagined herself here, never imagined him in her life like this. But one careless, fleeting moment had changed everything. As she grabbed her shoes, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen. A message from her best friend, So-young. Lena, you there? You're not answering my calls. Did something happen last night? Let me know. I'm worried about you. Lena felt a pang of guilt. So-young had been there for her through everything, from the long hours at work to the countless failed relationships. She had no idea how to explain this to her best friend. How could she? No one could understand the mess Lena had gotten herself into. She typed a quick reply. I'm fine. Just need some time. I'll talk later. Her hands were trembling as she sent it, and she immediately regretted the words. She wasn't fine. But how could she explain that to So-young, let alone to herself? Just then, she heard movement behind her. She froze. Lena? Hyun-seok's voice was hoarse from sleep, but it carried an unmistakable note of confusion. Where are you going? Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to explain this. She couldn't just run away, could she? But the thought of facing him, of confronting what had happened between them, it was too much. I have to go, Lena said, her voice strained, almost pleading with herself to keep it together. I'm sorry. This was a mistake. Hyun-seok sat up in bed, his eyes still heavy with sleep but his expression turning more serious as he processed her words. A mistake, he repeated, his brow furrowing. Lena, wait a minute. I can't stay, she cut him off, her voice breaking. I'm not ready for this. I never should have, this wasn't supposed to happen. She turned toward the door, her mind racing, her thoughts all over the place. She could already feel the walls closing in, the reality of what had just happened crashing down on her with the force of a freight train. Lena, please, he said, his voice softer now, almost concerned. She didn't turn around. You're not making sense. Her mind screamed to keep going, to escape, to hide from this. But her feet were rooted to the ground. She couldn't leave without saying something, without at least trying to explain the impossible. She finally turned, facing him. Hyun-seok was standing now, his expression a mixture of confusion and something else, a hint of vulnerability, maybe? His eyes locked with hers, and for the first time since she had met him, she didn't see the confident, untouchable CEO. She saw a man who, just like her, was grappling with the consequences of their impulsive actions. Hyun-seok, she said, her voice shaking, I don't know what happened last night, but I can't stay here. I need to figure this out. There was a long silence. For a moment, Lena thought he might argue, but instead, he nodded slowly, as if he understood. I understand, he said quietly, his tone more gentle than she expected. But you don't have to do this alone. Whatever this is, we can figure it out together. Lena's chest tightened at his words. She didn't want to believe him. She couldn't. He was the CEO of Veritech. He had a life, a reputation. There was no room for her in his world. I don't think you understand, she whispered, barely able to meet his gaze. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Hyun-seok froze, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. His eyes widened, and then, without warning, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Pregnant, he repeated, his voice a mix of disbelief and something else, something Lena couldn't quite place. Are you sure? Lena nodded, unable to speak. The reality of it all was starting to sink in, and her legs felt weak beneath her. She didn't know what to say next. What could she say? How could she explain everything that was swirling inside her? The fear. The uncertainty. The shame. She wasn't ready for this. Hyun-seok reached out, his hand gently brushing against hers. Lena. I don't know what this means, but we'll figure it out together. You're not alone in this. I swear. Lena looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since their night together. There was sincerity in his eyes, but there was also something else, a recognition of the weight of what they were about to face. But deep down, she knew she couldn't rely on him. Not now. Not when everything had been built on a lie. I need to go, she said again, more firmly this time. I can't do this here. With that, she turned, walked out the door, and left his penthouse behind, her heart pounding with uncertainty. But she knew one thing for sure, nothing would ever be the same again. Lena stepped into the cool morning air, her heart still racing, her thoughts a whirlwind. The sounds of the city, cars honking, footsteps rushing by, felt distant, muffled, as though she were in another world entirely. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know what the next step was. She just needed to get away from him, from the penthouse, from everything that had spiraled out of control. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she didn't check it. Not yet. She couldn't afford to think about what happened, about Hyun-seok's words, or about the life growing inside her. She needed time. Time to think. Time to breathe. The cool breeze felt refreshing against her skin, but it didn't do much to clear her mind. She crossed the street, walking aimlessly, trying to put as much distance between herself and the penthouse as possible. She knew she couldn't stay in Seoul. Not now, not with this secret hanging over her head. She couldn't keep running forever. But for now, running was all she could do. The next few days were a blur of anxiety, sleepless nights, and the constant hum of her own thoughts. She didn't know what she was supposed to feel. Part of her, most of her, wanted to forget everything, to bury the memories and pretend it never happened. But she couldn't. And she couldn't stay in Seoul either. Not while Hyun-seok, or worse, his mother, could find her. She didn't know how much longer she could avoid facing the truth. The truth that she was pregnant. But there was another truth, one she couldn't admit even to herself. She was scared. She was terrified. She had to get away. Lena found herself back at her parents' house in Gwangju, a place that once felt like home, a safe haven from the chaos of the world. It was a small, quiet town far removed from the whirlwind that was Seoul. She hadn't been here in years, not since she left for the city to pursue her career. But now, it felt like the only place she could escape to. Her mother, a kind, hard-working woman with soft eyes and a gentle voice, was thrilled to have her back, but her joy was tempered by Lena's silence. There were questions, of course. Questions about why she hadn't called in so long, why she looked so thin, so tired. But Lena didn't answer. She couldn't. Her father, a man of few words, didn't ask much, but Lena could feel the weight of his gaze on her whenever they were in the same room. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't push her. He never did. The silence was suffocating, but it was the only way Lena could exist right now, isolated, away from the world. Away from Hyun-seok. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to rest. She spent her time in the small guest bedroom, staring out the window, her thoughts a tangled mess of fear, confusion, and guilt. She had no idea what to do next. All she knew was that she couldn't face him. She couldn't face the consequences of that night. But the weight of the secret grew heavier with each passing day. She couldn't keep running from it forever. And eventually, she knew, it would catch up with her. Weeks passed, and the time away from Seoul gave Lena some clarity. She started to think about her future, not just for herself, but for the baby. She had never wanted to be a single mother, and certainly never thought it would happen like this, but she couldn't imagine giving up the child growing inside her. Despite everything that had happened, despite the uncertainty and the fear, she knew one thing: she wanted this child. But the question remained, what was she going to do about it? What was she going to do about Hyun-seok? She couldn't imagine ever going back to him, to the world he lived in. He had everything, and she had, well, she had a secret. And a growing sense of dread that one day, soon, someone would find out. But as time passed, something shifted inside her. The anger, the bitterness that had built up over the past few weeks, began to subside. Lena realized that running wasn't the answer. Hiding wasn't going to solve anything. She had to confront the truth. She had to face Hyun-seok, whether she was ready for it or not. It wasn't just about him. It was about her. About her future, and the future of her child. And so, she made the decision, she would return to Seoul. Not for him, but for herself. For her child. The day Lena finally decided to go back to Seoul, the thought of seeing him again, of facing the man who had unknowingly turned her life upside down, was paralyzing. But she couldn't wait forever. She couldn't live in fear. The train ride back was long, quiet. As the landscape of the countryside blurred by her window, Lena couldn't help but wonder what kind of life awaited her back in the city. Would she see him again? Would she ever be able to tell him the truth? She wasn't sure. But one thing was certain, she couldn't run anymore. By the time Lena arrived back in Seoul, the city felt foreign to her. The skyscrapers loomed overhead, the streets bustling with people who were going on with their lives while she was stuck, frozen by her past. She walked through the streets in a daze, her feet carrying her aimlessly, until she ended up outside a small cafe. It was familiar, a place she used to visit on lazy weekends, a quiet corner of the city where she could escape from everything. She hadn't been here in years, but the memories flooded back the moment she stepped inside. And then, just as she was about to turn away, she saw him. Hyun-seok. His back was turned, but she recognized him instantly. She could feel her heart in her throat. He was sitting at a table near the window, engrossed in his phone, completely unaware of her presence. For a moment, Lena was frozen. The past, the anger, the hurt, it all came rushing back in an instant. The fear that she had tried so hard to bury flooded her chest. But she couldn't leave. Not now. Not again. As if on cue, Hyun-seok looked up, and their eyes met across the room. And in that instant, everything stopped. Lena's heart raced in her chest as she stood there, rooted to the spot. Hyun-seok hadn't seen her in years, and yet here they were, two people who had once shared a night that had irrevocably altered the course of their lives. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a fleeting second, it felt as though time had frozen. The bustling cafe around them, the chatter of the customers, the clink of coffee cups, it all faded into the background. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the same intensity that had once made her heart beat faster. It was almost too much to bear, yet she couldn't look away. Her body tensed, ready to run, but her feet stayed firmly planted. He blinked, his surprise slowly morphing into recognition. Slowly, he stood from the table, his movements deliberate, like a man unsure of what to do with the emotions running through him. Lena? Hyun-seok's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a question hidden beneath the surface. He was taking in her appearance, the way she looked so different from the last time he saw her, more mature, more guarded. And yet, the sadness in her eyes seemed unchanged. Lena swallowed, the words stuck in her throat. What could she say? She wasn't prepared for this moment. Not after everything. Not after running away. Not after what she had left behind. She wanted to speak, to tell him everything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just nodded, a tight smile tugging at her lips. Yes, it's me, she said softly, the words tasting foreign. It had been 4 years since she'd last seen him, but here he was, standing in front of her, a man who had unknowingly haunted her thoughts ever since that night. The silence stretched between them, filled with so much unspoken history. For a moment, neither of them knew what to do. The tension was palpable. Is everything all right? Hyun-seok asked, taking a cautious step forward, as though unsure whether to close the distance between them or stay where he was. There was a softness in his voice, a quiet concern that Lena hadn't expected. She shifted uncomfortably, looking away for a moment. She wasn't sure how to answer. How could she? There was so much that had happened between them, so much left unsaid. I didn't expect to see you here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm just passing through. Hyun-seok's eyes darkened slightly, the corner of his lips tightening, as if 1,000 questions were forming in his mind. Passing through? He repeated her words, but his gaze didn't leave her. Lena, why didn't you reach out? The question hit her like a punch to the gut. She had avoided him. She had run away, tried to forget everything. She couldn't have reached out, she wasn't ready to face him, not after what had happened. I had to leave, she said, her voice catching in her throat. I needed to figure things out on my own. The words hung in the air, and Lena felt the sharp sting of regret. She hadn't just left Seoul, she had left him behind. Left behind everything, the future she never thought she could have. And now, standing here in front of him, she was unsure whether that decision had been right or wrong. Hyun-seok took another step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. Lena, He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with what he wanted to say. I've tried to find you. After that night, after you disappeared, I didn't know what happened. I thought you just... He paused again, the words seeming too difficult to form. I didn't know if you were all right. Lena's breath caught in her chest. He had been looking for her? She had no idea. She had buried herself in Gwangju, staying away from everything that reminded her of him, of that night. And now, hearing him say that he'd been searching for her, it was like a raw wound had just been reopened. I'm fine, Lena replied quickly, her voice steadier now. Really? I just needed space. To think. Hyun-seok watched her for a long moment, as though weighing her words carefully. Then, his expression softened, but only slightly. You disappeared without a word. No one knew where you went. Why didn't you let me help you? I could have. Because I didn't want your help, Lena interrupted, her voice sharp now, her own emotions beginning to surface. I couldn't be part of that world. Your world. I wasn't part of it then, and I'm not part of it now. I don't belong there, Hyun-seok. The words spilled out before she could stop them, the anger she had buried for so long rising to the surface. She had kept this secret, this bitterness, locked away for 4 years. I couldn't be a part of your life, she continued, her eyes darkening. Not after everything. He seemed taken aback, as though her words had caught him off guard. But instead of retreating, he stepped closer again, his voice lowering, softer this time. You think I wouldn't have taken responsibility? He asked quietly, his gaze never leaving hers. I never wanted you to leave. And I never wanted you to carry this on your own, Lena. You think I don't care? You think I wouldn't want to be there for you, for us? Lena's heart hammered in her chest, and she felt a wave of emotion threaten to overtake her. This wasn't how she had imagined this reunion. This wasn't what she had expected. The anger, the hurt, it was still there, but there was something else too. Something that made her want to believe him, made her want to think that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't like everyone else. But the walls she had built over the years were high and thick, and it would take more than a few words to bring them down. I didn't want to need anyone, Hyun-seok, Lena said, her voice breaking. I didn't want to need you. But I do. And that's the hardest part. For a long moment, Hyun-seok didn't say anything. He simply looked at her, as though he was searching for the right words. And then, without warning, he reached out, gently brushing her arm. Lena, he said softly, you're not alone in this. I won't let you go through this alone. Her breath hitched as his words settled over her like a blanket. She had always been independent, always been the one to carry her burdens alone. But now, standing in front of him, with the truth about to come tumbling out, she wasn't sure she could do it anymore. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one who had been carrying this weight. Lena stood there, her breath shallow, her chest tight. Hyun-seok's words echoed in her mind, you're not alone in this. She had heard those words 100 times before, from people who promised her the world, but never really understood the weight of the burden she carried. So why did hearing him say it feel different? Why did it make her heart ache in ways she couldn't explain? She didn't know. But she didn't have time to dwell on it. The cafe around them seemed to fade as Lena tried to gather her thoughts. She didn't want to get lost in this moment, not yet. She couldn't afford to. Not when so much was at stake. The life growing inside her, her future, her identity, everything was tangled in a web of unresolved feelings and fear. She had spent years running from this moment, from him, from everything she hadn't wanted to face. But now, here they were. What happens now, Hyun-seok? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the words tasting like acid in her mouth. You want to help? What does that even mean? Hyun-seok looked taken aback by her sharpness, but his gaze softened. He took a step closer, but this time, he didn't reach out. He didn't touch her, didn't try to close the distance between them. He knew better than to push her now. This was her decision. It means that I'm here, Lena, he said quietly. It means that whatever comes next, we face it together. I will be there for you, for the baby. The word baby made her stomach twist. There it was again, the truth. The thing she couldn't escape from, no matter how hard she tried. She wanted to scream, wanted to run away again. But the weight of his words held her in place. I can't keep running, she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. It wasn't what she had intended to say, but somehow, it felt like the truth. For a long moment, Hyun-seok said nothing. His eyes searched hers, as if he were looking for something, some clue, some sign that she was ready to face this, to face him again. But he saw only the walls she had built, the ones she had used to protect herself. And he didn't blame her. He had been part of those walls, after all. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady. I'm not asking you to forget everything, Lena. I don't expect you to trust me completely right away. I don't expect things to be easy. But I want to be part of this, of your life, if you'll let me. Lena's eyes burned with unshed tears. She couldn't remember the last time she had allowed herself to feel anything like this. The loneliness, the self-imposed isolation, it had been easier to shut everything out. But now, with him standing here in front of her, offering something she hadn't even dared to dream of, she felt everything all at once. I don't know what I'm doing, Hyun-seok, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know how to be a mother. I don't know how to be with you. His face softened, and for a moment, there was only the quiet hum of the cafe, the clinking of coffee cups, the distant sounds of the world moving on. Then, he stepped forward, just enough to bridge the distance between them. You don't have to have it all figured out, he said gently. We don't have to have everything planned. We take it one day at a time. And whatever you need, I'll be here. We'll figure it out together. Lena swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing. She had always prided herself on being strong, on being independent, but the truth was, she didn't have all the answers. She wasn't sure if she could do this. She wasn't sure if she could ever trust him the way he seemed to want her to. But in that moment, standing in front of him, she saw something she hadn't seen before, a willingness to try. And that, in itself, was more than she had ever expected from anyone, especially him. She exhaled shakily, her mind still spinning. I can't promise you anything, Hyun-seok. I can't even promise I'll stay in Seoul. I have my own life, my own plans. But, maybe we can talk. Maybe we can figure out a way to. Before she could finish, his phone rang, cutting through the fragile moment they had built. Hyun-seok glanced at the screen, his expression instantly shifting from warmth to something more businesslike. He glanced at her apologetically before answering. Hyun-seok, he said, his voice already authoritative, the CEO persona slipping back on with ease. What is it? Lena stood there, frozen, feeling suddenly out of place again. She didn't belong in his world, and she wasn't sure she ever would. The harsh reality of their differences, the vast chasm between their worlds, hadn't changed. She had to remind herself of that. As Hyun-seok spoke in rapid Korean, his attention fully consumed by the call, Lena's gaze drifted out of the cafe window. She could feel the weight of her thoughts creeping back in. The future, the baby, Hyun-seok, everything was pulling at her in different directions. The decision she had made to return to Seoul, to face him, was only the first step in a long journey. But she couldn't go forward with the same doubts, the same fears that had kept her running for so long. She had to find a way to make peace with her choices. Later that evening, after Hyun-seok had left to handle an emergency at Veritech, Lena found herself standing in front of the small apartment she had rented just before meeting him. She had only just moved back to Seoul, trying to keep a low profile, trying to avoid stirring up attention. But now, with Hyun-seok's presence in her life again, so unexpectedly and powerfully, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep her distance. She didn't know how to keep hiding from everything. Lena pressed her palm against the cool glass of the window, staring out at the city below. The lights of Seoul twinkled in the distance, but it all felt so distant, so foreign. How had she gotten here? How had everything changed so quickly? But deep down, she knew, change was inevitable. The only thing she could control was how she faced it. And now, the most difficult choice of all loomed ahead of her. The next few days were a blur for Lena. She had thought that returning to Seoul would bring some sense of clarity, some kind of peaceful resolution to the chaos that had engulfed her life. But if anything, the tension only seemed to grow with every passing hour. Every time she thought about her future, the baby, and Hyun-seok's presence in it, she felt like she was caught in a whirlwind, pulled in every direction, but unable to hold on to anything for long enough to make a decision. And yet, despite the storm of emotions that churned inside her, there was something about the quiet moments that made her feel a little more grounded. Something about the soft hum of the city around her, the steady rhythm of life moving forward, made her believe that maybe, just maybe, things could work out. But that was before the cafe. Lena had decided to take a walk that afternoon to clear her head. She wasn't meeting anyone. She wasn't trying to escape anything. She just needed to think. Her phone was buzzing again in her pocket, and she'd ignored it once more, mostly from habit, but partly because it was Hyun-seok. He had been calling and texting all morning, checking in, making sure she was okay. But she wasn't sure if she was ready for another conversation just yet. She wasn't sure she could handle him again, his warmth, his sincerity, and that quiet desperation in his eyes every time he asked her to trust him. She wasn't ready for that. But as she walked, the reality of it all kept pressing in, reminding her that no matter how hard she tried to avoid it, things weren't going to be so simple. She couldn't just walk away, not from Hyun-seok, not from everything he represented, not from the baby. After a while, her feet had led her to the same cafe she and Hyun-seok had met just days earlier. She hadn't planned it. It wasn't intentional. But there she was, standing at the door, hesitant, unsure of what she was hoping for. The familiar chime of the bell above the door jingled as she entered, but she stopped in her tracks the moment she stepped inside. Her eyes locked onto a figure sitting at a corner table, hunched over a laptop with a coffee cup beside him. Hyun-seok. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she thought about turning around and leaving. The last thing she wanted was another confrontation. The last thing she needed was another interruption to her carefully constructed life. But before she could retreat, he glanced up, his eyes meeting hers instantly. It was like the air between them thickened, a current running through the space, pulling them together even though they had spent the last few days apart. His eyes softened when he saw her, and there was a flicker of something between them. Something unspoken, something familiar. It was a look she had seen before, the look that sent a tingle down her spine. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just stood there, caught in the tension that had been building ever since their last meeting. Then, slowly, almost as if he wasn't sure of her reaction, Hyun-seok stood up. "Lena," he said, his voice steady but with a trace of surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." She swallowed hard, her heart racing. She wasn't sure what to say, how to explain why she had come back, why she was standing in front of him now. She wasn't even sure she was ready for this, for him. "I wasn't expecting to see you either," Lena said, her voice quiet, almost tentative. She wanted to sound stronger, more confident, but the words seemed to slip away from her every time she tried. Hyun-seok's lips pressed into a tight smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "How are you?" he asked, his tone lighter than before, but the concern in his eyes was clear. "Are you doing okay?" Lena glanced away for a moment, trying to steady herself, trying to find the words. "I'm figuring it out," she said finally. "One day at a time." "Good." Hyun-seok nodded, his gaze lingering on her. There was something in his eyes, something raw and unguarded, that made Lena's heart ache. But she quickly pushed the feeling aside, reminded herself of the walls she'd built. She couldn't let herself get caught up in this again. The silence stretched between them, uncomfortable yet familiar. It wasn't awkward, but it wasn't easy either. There was so much left unsaid, so much left to resolve. Finally, Hyun-seok broke the silence. I've been thinking a lot about what you said last time. About us. About everything. Lena felt her chest tighten. She wasn't sure she could handle another one of his confessions, another one of his promises that she didn't know how to trust. You don't have to do this, Hyun-seok, she said, her voice low but firm. I came back to figure things out, for myself. I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't know if I'm ready for this. She gestured between them, the invisible distance still hanging between them like a thick fog. His expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. A kind of understanding, mixed with a quiet frustration. I'm not asking you to figure everything out in a day, he said softly. I'm just asking you to give me a chance. A chance to show you that I can be part of this. Part of your life, Lena. She looked at him, her chest tightening once more. She wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion, the overwhelming emotions, or the fact that the man standing in front of her really wasn't going to give up. I don't know if I can trust you, she whispered. The words sounded like a confession, the truth hanging heavy between them. I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore. For a long moment, Hyun-seok didn't respond. Instead, he took a step toward her, his gaze never leaving hers. I can't make you trust me, Lena. I can't change the past. But I can be here now. And I'll wait for as long as it takes. For you to figure out what you want. For you to see that, we can make this work, if you'll let me. His words lingered in the air, heavy, loaded with the weight of everything that had happened, and everything that still could. Lena felt the walls she had built around her crack, just a little. She wasn't ready to let them fall completely. But something in his voice, something in the quiet sincerity of his eyes, made her want to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Maybe. Lena left the cafe in a daze. Her mind was racing, her heart still pounding from the conversation she'd had with Hyun-seok. The words he had spoken, I'll wait for as long as it takes, echoed in her head, looping like a broken record. She couldn't decide whether his patience was a gift or a curse. Part of her wanted to throw caution to the wind, to lean into the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could make something work. That the life she had imagined for herself, one of quiet independence and solitude, didn't have to be the only path. But then there was the other part of her, the part that had been hurt, abandoned, and betrayed, not just by the people she had trusted, but by herself. That part of her screamed to run, to push him away again, because staying meant vulnerability. Staying meant she would have to feel again, and feeling was something she hadn't allowed herself to do in years. As she walked through the bustling streets of Seoul, the familiar sights and sounds seemed distant. The bright lights, the chatter of people passing by, all felt disconnected, as if she were watching the city from behind a thick glass window. She turned the corner and walked into the small park she'd always loved, a hidden gem amidst the chaos of the city. It was quieter here, the hum of traffic replaced by the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. She sat on one of the benches, resting her head in her hands, trying to gather her thoughts. What do I want? She asked herself the same question she had been asking since the day she left Seoul, the day her life had changed forever. She wanted peace. She wanted certainty. But above all, she wanted control over her own life. And right now, she didn't feel like she had any control at all. She didn't want to need Hyun-seok. She didn't want to need anyone. She had spent so long building walls, creating a life that didn't rely on anyone, and now he was here, asking her to break down those walls, to trust him again. It wasn't that she didn't care for him, God, it was the opposite. But it was easier to push him away, easier to keep him at arm's length. Because the moment she let him in, she would have to face everything she had been running from. A soft sigh escaped her lips as she gazed out at the tranquil pond in front of her. The buzzing of her phone broke through her thoughts, and she reached into her pocket, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the name flashing on the screen. Hyun-seok. She almost didn't answer. But something inside her urged her to pick up. Lena? His voice was soft, hesitant, as though he were worried she might hang up at any second. I'm here, she said, her voice hoarse. It was a simple answer, but it carried a weight she couldn't quite explain. "I've been thinking," Hyun-seok continued, his tone now more confident, but still cautious. Maybe we should talk about this more. About what happens next. You said you needed time. But I think we need to have a real conversation. Not just these short meetings, these little moments that leave everything unsaid." Lena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. Part of her wanted to agree, wanted to open up and finally allow herself to have the conversation she had been avoiding for so long. But another part of her, the part that had been hurt, wanted to hang up and run away, to shut him out before he got too close again. "I don't know if I'm ready to have that conversation," she admitted quietly, the honesty of her words settling like a stone in her chest. "I understand," he said quickly, his voice gentle. "But we can't keep running from it, Lena. This is real. We have to talk about it eventually. For us. For the baby." The mention of the baby sent a jolt through her, and her throat tightened. The baby. It was always there, hovering in the background, the constant reminder of everything that had changed. "I know," she whispered, swallowing hard. "But I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to trust again." "You don't have to trust me right away," he said, his words full of understanding. "I just need you to know that I'm here. And I'll be here whenever you're ready. For however long it takes." The promise lingered in the air between them, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Lena sighed. "I need some time. Some space to think. Can we talk later?" "Of course," Hyun-seok replied, his voice soft. "Take all the time you need. But know that I'm not going anywhere." Over the next few days, Lena retreated into herself, spending more time in her small apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. Every decision felt monumental, every moment of hesitation weighed down by the knowledge that her life, their lives, were about to change forever. She wasn't sure what was more terrifying, the thought of keeping this secret from the world forever, or the thought of bringing Hyun-seok into her life again. The walls she had spent so long building felt fragile, and the idea of letting him break them down seemed both impossible and inevitable. One afternoon, after a restless night of trying to sort through her thoughts, she received a text from So-young, her best friend from Gwangju. The message was simple, yet it made Lena pause. "I know you're going through a lot, but you're not alone. I'm here for you, no matter what. Don't forget that." The words hit her harder than she expected. So-young had always been there for her, through every setback, every heartbreak, every failure. She had never once turned her back on Lena, and yet here Lena was, pushing everyone away, trying to carry this burden alone. Lena stared at the message for a long time, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her chest. Maybe she didn't have to do this alone. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to let people in. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Lena made her decision. She had spent enough time hiding from the truth, hiding from him. She wasn't ready to trust him completely, but maybe she didn't have to. Maybe, for now, they could take small steps towards something real. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. Her face was tired, her eyes filled with uncertainty. But there was something else there too, a glimmer of resolve, a spark that had been missing for a long time. "I'm not alone in this," she reminded herself, her hand resting on her stomach. With one last deep breath, she picked up her phone and dialed Hyun-seok's number. It was time to start talking. Lena paced the length of her small apartment, the phone clutched tightly in her hand. The screen lit up, her finger hovering above the dial button, and for a moment, she froze. She could hear her heart pounding in her ears, feel the unease bubbling in her stomach. This was it, the first step toward facing everything she had been avoiding. She wasn't ready, not entirely, but she had to do this. She had to take the first step. With a deep breath, she pressed the button. The phone rang once, twice, then a familiar voice picked up on the other end. "Lena?" Hyun-seok's voice was low and steady, but there was an edge of uncertainty in it, as though he had been waiting for this moment, but wasn't sure what to expect. "Hi," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. She hadn't expected herself to sound so composed. "It's me." "Lena, are you?" He paused, as though choosing his words carefully. "Are you okay?" She sat down on the couch, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't know. But I need to talk to you." "Of course," he responded immediately, the urgency in his voice now clear. "I'm here. Whatever you need." Lena hesitated for a moment, unsure of where to begin. So much had happened, so many emotions, so many unanswered questions. But for once, she pushed aside the swirling thoughts in her mind and focused on the one thing she knew was true: she couldn't do this alone. Not anymore. "I've been running from this," she began, her voice soft but resolute. "From everything. From you, from the baby, from myself. I don't know why. Maybe because I was scared. I didn't want to be vulnerable. But I can't keep running anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Lena wasn't sure if he was still there. But then he spoke, his tone calm and steady, with a depth of understanding that she hadn't expected. "Lena, I get it. I understand why you ran. But you don't have to do this on your own. You don't have to be afraid anymore." The words hung in the air between them, quiet but powerful. They weren't promises or grand declarations. They were simple. Honest. And for the first time in a long time, Lena felt the walls she had built around her begin to crack. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know how to be with you. Or how to do this whole pregnancy thing. I feel so lost." "You don't have to be ready right now," Hyun-seok replied gently. "I don't need you to have all the answers. I'm not asking you to figure everything out at once. I'm just asking you to let me be there for you. Let's take it one step at a time. We don't have to have it all figured out right away." Lena closed her eyes, his words sinking deep into her chest. The pressure that had been building in her for days, weeks, months, it began to loosen, just a little. She wasn't sure how long it would take to undo the damage, to heal from the scars of her past, but she wasn't alone in this anymore. And that was enough. For now, it was enough. "I'm scared, Hyun-seok," she admitted quietly. "I'm scared that I'll mess everything up. That I'll hurt the baby, or that I won't be able to be the kind of mother I need to be." "You're not alone," he repeated softly. "And you're already doing your best. That's all that matters." Lena nodded, even though he couldn't see it. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do this alone. Maybe she could rely on someone else. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel hope. Later that evening, after the phone call had ended, Lena felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. It wasn't peace, not yet. But it was a step toward it. A step toward something different. She stood in front of the mirror again, her reflection now seeming less like a stranger and more like someone she could understand. The uncertainty was still there, still lurking in the back of her mind, but it didn't feel as heavy. She had made the choice to reach out, to open up. And even though the path ahead wasn't clear, she wasn't alone in walking it anymore. For the first time since her return to Seoul, she felt like maybe she had made the right decision. The next morning, Lena woke up early, as usual. But today, there was something different in the air. The sunlight streaming through the window felt warmer, more inviting. The world outside her window seemed less intimidating, less overwhelming. She walked to the small kitchen and made herself a cup of tea, the comforting routine of her morning grounding her in the present. She wasn't sure where to go from here, or what the future held. But she wasn't afraid to take the next step. The phone on her counter buzzed, and she glanced down at the screen. Another message from Hyun-seok. "I know things aren't easy right now, but I'm here for you. Whenever you're ready to talk more, we'll figure it out." One step at a time. You're not alone in this. Lena smiled softly, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it away quickly, not wanting to let herself be overwhelmed by the emotion, but it felt good, so good, to have someone who cared. Someone who was willing to stand by her side, no matter how messy things got. She set her phone down and took a deep breath. Today was the first day of something new. The first step toward healing, toward forgiveness, both for herself and for Hyun-seok. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a chance. A real chance. Later that afternoon, Lena found herself sitting in the same cafe where she had first seen Hyun-seok. This time, it wasn't an accident. This time, she had chosen to be here. She wasn't sure if he would show up, but a part of her knew he would. He had told her he would be there, and for the first time, she believed him. A few minutes passed, and then, like clockwork, he walked in. His eyes found hers immediately, and he smiled, that soft, genuine smile she had been missing for so long. "Hi," he said, his voice warm as he made his way toward her. "Hi," she replied, her heart beating a little faster than she expected. She wasn't sure why, but seeing him again felt like a homecoming. Like everything had been leading to this moment. He sat down across from her, his expression filled with that quiet intensity that always seemed to make her feel like she was the only person in the room. "I'm glad you came," he said softly. Lena took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm glad too," she admitted, her eyes meeting his. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm ready to take it one step at a time." And with that, for the first time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a new beginning. The days following their conversation in the cafe felt like a strange mixture of clarity and confusion. Lena had made the decision to take things one step at a time, but with each passing day, the weight of that decision grew heavier. The walls she had spent years building, the fortress of self-reliance she had carefully constructed around her heart, those walls were slowly crumbling, piece by piece. And with that destruction, came a sense of freedom that both exhilarated and terrified her. She had agreed to meet Hyun-seok again, but she wasn't sure what that meeting would look like. They hadn't talked about the baby yet. They hadn't discussed the future. They had merely agreed to exist together in the same space and see where it led. But the uncertainty was beginning to eat away at her. She couldn't keep ignoring the elephant in the room, the thing that hung between them like a shadow. As she walked toward the cafe where they had agreed to meet, she felt the familiar weight of her thoughts pressing down on her. She had to bring it up. They couldn't keep pretending that things were simple, that everything would just fall into place on its own. She needed answers, and so did he. They needed to figure out what came next. Lena pushed open the door to the cafe and immediately spotted him sitting in the corner by the window. His back was slightly turned to her, but she could tell by the way he held himself that he was waiting. Waiting for her. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a brief moment, she wondered if she was doing the right thing. But then she pushed the thought aside. There was no turning back now. She walked over and sat down across from him, her breath catching slightly as she met his gaze. He smiled, but it was tinged with the same uncertainty she felt. "I wasn't sure if you'd show up," he said, his voice warm but with a note of hesitation. Lena smiled back, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm here," she said softly, "and I think we need to talk." Hyun-seok nodded, his expression serious. "I agree. About everything. About us. The baby. Our future." The words were out there, hanging between them, and there was no turning back. The tension in the air thickened as both of them realized the magnitude of what they were about to discuss. They had barely touched on the subject of the baby before, and now, here they were, facing the reality of it all. Lena took a deep breath. "I don't know where to start," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "There's so much I'm still figuring out." Hyun-seok reached across the table and took her hand in his, the gesture simple but comforting. "You don't have to have all the answers, Lena. We'll figure it out together." She met his eyes, searching for the sincerity she needed to believe that they could actually make this work. He had said all the right things before, but she wasn't sure if words alone were enough. Not when so much had been left unsaid. "I've been so scared, Hyun-seok," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been scared that I won't be able to do this. That I won't be able to handle being a mother, and that I won't be able to let you back into my life after everything that happened." His grip on her hand tightened slightly, his eyes softening. "I know you've been through a lot, Lena. And I know it's not easy to trust again. But you don't have to do this alone. You never have to do anything alone. I'm here. For you. For the baby. For whatever comes next." She squeezed his hand, feeling a mix of relief and confusion wash over her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that they could do this together, but there was still a part of her, no, a huge part of her, that was afraid to let go of the life she had built without him. "I don't want to hurt you," she said quietly. "I don't want to drag you into something you're not ready for. I've spent so long protecting myself that I don't know how to let someone else in. Not even you." Hyun-seok's eyes were filled with understanding, but there was something else there too, a hint of sadness, as though he wished he could fix everything for her. But he knew that wasn't possible. "You're not dragging me into anything, Lena," he said gently. "I'm not here because I feel obligated. I'm here because I want to be. Because I care about you. I care about this baby. And I care about us. We'll face everything together, one step at a time. No pressure. No expectations. Just us." Lena felt her chest tighten, a mixture of guilt and longing welling up inside her. She had never been good at asking for help, at letting others take care of her. It felt unnatural, like she was exposing a weakness she had spent her whole life trying to hide. But in that moment, as she looked at Hyun-seok, she realized that maybe it wasn't weakness to ask for help. Maybe it was strength. Maybe it was the first real step toward healing, toward allowing herself to have the kind of love and support she had denied herself for so long. "I don't know if I'm ready to let you all the way in," Lena said, her voice shaky but honest. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to take that first step. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm willing to figure it out with you." Hyun-seok smiled, the warmth returning to his eyes. "That's all I'm asking for. A chance." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of their conversation sink in. The air between them felt different now, lighter somehow. The fear hadn't completely gone away, but it no longer felt like the only thing standing between them. There was something else now, a quiet hope, a possibility. "I don't know what the future holds," Lena said, her voice steadying as she spoke. "But I think I can finally see a way forward. With you. And I'll be right there with you," Hyun-seok replied, his voice filled with conviction. "Every step of the way." As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, the unease that had gripped Lena's chest began to loosen, just a little. There was still so much uncertainty in the air, so many things left to figure out, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was carrying it all on her own. And that, more than anything, felt like a beginning. The weeks that followed felt like a delicate dance, one step forward, one step back. Lena was learning how to navigate her new reality, balancing the quiet life she had built for herself with the unavoidable presence of Hyun-seok. They hadn't rushed anything. There were no grand declarations, no overwhelming promises. Just small steps, moments of connection that slowly began to bridge the gap between their past and the uncertain present. Lena sat on a park bench near the Han River, her hands cradling the small notebook she had started keeping since returning to Seoul. Inside were notes, thoughts, sketches, everything she wanted to say but couldn't speak aloud. It was a safe place for her to process the chaos inside her head, to untangle the mess of fear, longing, and hope that had become her constant companion. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't notice the familiar figure walking along the path until he was nearly beside her. "Lena," Hyun-seok's voice broke through her concentration, gentle yet firm. She looked up, startled, and saw him smiling down at her. His presence brought an odd combination of comfort and tension. She closed the notebook slowly, unsure if she was ready to let him into this private world. "Hi," she replied softly, her voice tentative. He sat down beside her, careful to respect the space she clearly needed. For a few moments, they just watched the river together, the sounds of the city mingling with the quiet rush of water below. It was peaceful in a way that Seoul rarely felt, a brief pause from the constant whirlwind of life, business, and unspoken emotions. "I thought about what you said," he finally spoke, his tone thoughtful. "About taking things one step at a time. I want you to know that I respect that. I'm not here to push, Lena. I'm here to walk with you, at your pace." She nodded, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "I appreciate that. I'm just scared, Hyun-seok. I've spent so long protecting myself that it feels like letting someone in now is impossible." He reached over, resting his hand lightly over hers. "It's not impossible," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "It's just unfamiliar. That's all. But unfamiliar doesn't mean wrong. It means you're learning, growing. You're allowing yourself to trust again. And that's brave." Her eyes met his, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe him. Not because of promises or declarations, but because of the quiet consistency he showed in the little things, the patience, the respect for her boundaries, the way he simply was without demanding more. "I want to try," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how far I can go yet, but I want to try. For the baby. And, maybe for us too." Hyun-seok's hand tightened slightly around hers, a small but significant gesture of support. "That's all I need," he said softly. "One step at a time. That's all any of us can take." They sat there in silence for a while, just the two of them, letting the sounds of the city and the river fill the spaces between their words. For Lena, it felt like a moment suspended in time, a rare pocket of calm in a life that had been anything but calm for the past several years. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lena felt a strange sense of clarity. She didn't know what the future held. There were still obstacles, still doubts, still questions that begged for answers, but for the first time in years, she felt a spark of something she thought she had lost forever, hope. A quiet smile formed on her lips as she glanced at Hyun-seok. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but filled with meaning. "For being here. For not giving up." Hyun-seok smiled back, the warmth in his eyes reflecting the fading light of the sun. "I'm not going anywhere," he said simply. "And neither are you, not really. We're in this together now." Lena's heart swelled with emotion, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and anticipation. She didn't know exactly what awaited them, but she knew this, she wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time, that felt like enough. As the city lights flickered on one by one, reflecting in the river below, Lena and Hyun-seok sat side by side, their hands still lightly entwined, ready to face whatever came next, together. Please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe for more stories like this.